The HX Collective explores the human experience through three main channels of life: work, relationships, and self. With raw, authentic conversations, the podcast investigates how challenges can become powerful teachers, leading to personal growth and deeper connections. Rooted in humanity-centered design, each episode reflects a commitment to doing good and doing well, featuring diverse voices and generational perspectives. Expect gripping stories of struggle and success, with thought-provoking discussions and concrete tools and tactics that encourage you to rethink your relationship with distress, helping you to establish your full human experience. This is the HX Collective channel. Welcome to this current episode of the HX Collective podcast, where today we're going to have an amazing conversation with a good friend, Bob Craig. I can tell you I've had the pleasure of knowing Bob for almost 2 decades, either directly or indirectly, as a former CIO and executive of one of the best law firms in the country. And yet here we are present day. Bob is in the midst of this amazing personal transformation. And unlike many, this transformation journey is not individually his own. He is stepping into the role of coach and advisor and change agent, and he's bringing a wealth of wisdom of what it means to think about change at the intersection of human and this artificial intelligence experience. So, Bob, welcome. I am so happy that you reached out as we have launched this new podcast and as we are united at the HX Collective to elevate human flourishing. And I can't wait for you to share a bit of your own story and journey and how people can begin to think about their own human flourishing and human experience through the lens of your transformation. So welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Deb. It's amazing to be here. I deeply appreciate you taking the time to do this. And I also feel like I have to congratulate you on just the creation of HX Collective, because I think it's going to be things like this that heal the world.
Yeah.
Until we start to really explore what it even means to flourish as a human in the deepest sense possible, the world's going to struggle. And I think AI is going to make that struggle even more opaque and difficult.
Yeah. Well, it's so awesome. And, and I think for our audience's benefit, I really do want you to step back. We're going to have some additional notes of your bio and your kind of more detailed background, but I'd love to start just, kind of at a contextual level, because it's not often when I'm interacting with somebody who has been at the forefront of technology and the disruption to business and to human beings with the intersection of technology. I mean, what I love too about Bob, when I think about, a very impressive 40-year career, it's like you've been at this before email. I mean, at the word processor. I mean, what a treat for us today to really get the understanding of where the role as a leader and a leader of things that include technology and digital transformation. And at the same time, since I've known you, that has never been absent how to really create access to really make and improve lives of people, and that human beings are deeply interconnected, I know, to the work as a technology thought leader. So give us a little bit more of your background and story, and then we're going to talk about some of the work you're doing, particularly around the liminal mind. And I know that that's going to be a term of art that we're going to unpack even more deeply. But tell us a little bit about just history and kind of where we are present day.
Yeah, thanks for that question. The part of the most interesting thing about being my age is you get to reflect back and you notice things that took you down paths that you didn't pay attention to at the time. So I graduated from college in 1983. I almost literally stumbled into a degree called information systems. I say stumble because I didn't have a lot of direction, guidance. My father was a design draftsman. I worked for US Steel for decades. And as I was heading off to college, he said to me, I don't care what you study, better include computers. And I didn't know it at the time, but he said that because he saw the handwriting on the wall that his career was coming to an end, to be replaced by computer-aided drafting. So I said, oh, okay. And I found this little college with this little degree called information systems. And what I didn't know at the time is it set me up at the intersection of technology and people, in particular, people affected by the change of technology. And so in 83, there was no email, there were no cell phones, but wave after wave of technology evolution, from the mini computer to PC networking to the internet to Blackberries, and it just, of course, keeps coming. Big data analytics, cloud computing, and now here we are with generative AI. And so my earliest days were as a COBOL programmer, back, I say, when life was simple, when a clean compile was a good day. But I deep down knew I wasn't a very good programmer. It didn't light me on fire. But what happened was the business was growing. They needed analysts to pay more attention to defining business requirements and then helping manage programmers. And that was my entree into the intersection of people and technology. And I quite literally just followed open doors. I knocked on a lot of doors to navigate my career, but almost did it with kind of a blind instinct on moving to the next step. Not really, in other words, deeply appreciating what I now look back on as, I don't know if it's a unique skill, but it was definitely a passion of understanding how these technologies would affect large groups of people, in my case, predominantly law firms, and be able to try and put people at ease to be able to absorb the change and then know that it's all going to be fine. And it always was. Yeah.
Well, knowing you in that particular context, I think you always stand out to me as a category of one in this space that that deep, abiding connective tissue between what is required to drive more productivity and more, efficiency and effectiveness and profitability, and seeing that as a lot of why technology and transformation has been so prevalent in every industry, but just watching that is a necessary outcome for a lot of our digital transformations. But
Mhm.
never did I ever see you lead without this deep, abiding desire for the human beings that were in your orbit. And that's not just those employees or those attorneys, but it was also, clients and vendors and suppliers, like creating that space of confidence and ease. That's
Mm.
always been really, really important to you. And I think that the blending of those two things, one might say that the IQ and the EQ sort of have intersected. And, maybe say a little bit more, what's the access point to that? Because it would be very easy for you to lean heavily into more IQ, but not necessarily understand that in the end, the user on the other side's got to be able to cope or deal. What's that all about? Because I think that's unique, unique something about you and really in your leadership experiences.
Thank you. My answer might surprise you. That was, I would like to say that was true altruistic characteristics that I expressed. But the truth, upon deep reflection, in particular over the last 10 years, but most especially 3 years, after I stepped down in December of 22, the truth was it was really a quest to understand what people needed and how they felt as a way to earn their appreciation and high regard.
Oh,
And what I learned is that external approval that I was constantly striving for was a surrogate for a lack of approval of myself.
wow.
So it was a really deeply, and this is what I love about this construct of the liminal mind, because that I can hold those truths together.
Yeah.
That emotional state of being that in a lot of ways turned into emotional torment for me, deep angst I didn't understand. It actually brought forward wonderful career attributes that served the organizations I worked for quite well, but it took a toll on me. And so understanding that for what it is, looking back,
Yeah.
and recognizing it for what it is and being able to hold those multiple truths at once is where the passion burns to help younger professionals come to some deeper awareness to avoid that same suffering. Not to imply that my suffering is the same as others. I don't want to imply that, but um, I think it is a safe, based on all of the wonderful research and writing out there, it is a safe assumption that we all suffer in one form or another from this existential, or is it intrinsic question of who are we really, and does what we do matter, and who cares about us and who cares about what we do. So
That's so impactful. And for folks that are meeting you for the first time on this podcast, I want you to know that this is super profound, because this is a person who you would have never assumed that there was an internal driver that was causing any levels of distress, that externalized delight. So to the point of, while there were attributes and positive outcomes that really served you well until they didn't, I think that's where this is a great place to pivot and to talk about, the what happened and what is happening, if you will, more specifically, that's led you to your work in the space of the liminal mind. So you said much has shifted, and knowing in the last 3 years in particular, you made a career shift. You stepped away from this very prominent and respected and highly regarded, chief level role to do some of that examining. And so maybe give us a little bit about that space and then what it's producing for you right now as you're thinking about the work of the liminal mind.
yeah, it's funny. Again, I stepped down in December of 22, so it'll be 3 years this coming December that I've had wide open space in my calendar and in my mind. That's the way I describe it. I thought I stepped down because I was burned out, and the job's hard, and the CIO job in Big Law is not getting any easier, and so it's easy. And by the way, on the subject of burnout, that term concerns me a little bit. And
Okay.
again, maybe this is my takeaway. But what the term suggests to me is it's completely externally driven. The organization must be overly stressful or doesn't care, therefore I'm burned out. My experience upon reflection is I left too early. And I left because I was in a fragile state of being. I alluded to it already. But I was interpreting my environment in ways that just weren't true, is the truth of it. I can see that now because I had that wide open space to explore, and I had lots of amazing people and organizations pulling me into the uncomfortable shadows in me to explore those questions. But yeah, I left too early. I have regret. I just I read a lot, and Dan Pink's most recent book, The Power of Regret, was really, really important to me because it compelled me to process that regret. The only bad regret is regret that's not processed. And I know now that I left early, and it was because of my kind of mental perspectives and constructs on what I perceive the environment to be.
Yeah.
I can regret that and still move forward because I've learned a lot as a result of that.
Bob,
So yeah, that's what is kind of put the fire in me to say there's some way to use that experience to help.
yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, how powerful is that? And if there's anyone listening right now that is maybe experiencing that feeling of burnout and looking at this as an externally implied or externally imposed set of circumstances, while the environment we're operating in absolutely has impact. But I appreciate the willingness for you to give us a peek under the tent of the self journey and to be able to see things with a clearer sense in a way that allows you to acknowledge the regret and to utilize that regret as fuel for others, your flourishing and for the flourishing of others. Tell us about presence-based coaching and tell us about the liminal mind. I love you have a manifesto. First of all, people listening, there is something powerful about being in the season of life that Bob and I are in right now, when you feel like you've earned the right to like declare a manifesto. So I'm just going to say, well done, Bob Craig. But having a little bit more insight around, the context of now, what are you doing with that awareness, that processed regret? Tell us a little bit about the journey you're on now, and then we'll dig in like how people who are listening might be able to also grow from this experience.
Sure. Yeah, two or three key data points in that 3-year transition, one of which was actually even before I left. Again, another proof point that the organization I worked for was amazing. I took a 6-week sabbatical after declaring to the chairman I was leaving. That was a very gracious act for him to say, take some time, do what you need to do. And then I came back after sabbatical. So on that sabbatical, I had been following an organization called the Modern Elder Academy, MEA for short. And the founder's extraordinary, his name's Chip Conley. It's an exploration and really a redefinition of the very nature of midlife and to include the very nature of retirement. And so it's all about exploring a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset. So I went to a workshop down in Baja, Mexico, and it just blew the doors off my mind for a couple of reasons. One was I'm in a room with hedge fund managers, authors, the imposter syndrome was screaming in this space. But the way they do their workshops is a deep discovery of who you are and how you show up. And I learned that to a person, 17 people in this workshop, everybody struggled with imposter syndrome.
Wow.
It was affirming and like earthquaking all at the same time. I knew I had something that I had to figure out. I have subsequently been very close to this organization. I've done a number of different workshops for different reasons that have been extraordinarily helpful. That's where I started to meet a bunch of really high-end, really impressive life coaches, professional coaches. And I thought, I should do that. I love people. I especially love people who work in technology. I could coach them. Mentoring was one of the favorite parts of what I did for decades. And so one of the people I went to a workshop with said, you need to look at presence-based coaching because it's based on the principles of somatic awareness and mindfulness. And I went through that training course. I loved it because it was predominantly on site, and that was cool considering our post-COVID era. It too was an even deeper exploration of who we are, how we show up, all of those deep questions. What I learned though was, let me put it this way. I learned almost more about myself than I did about the art of coaching, which again was another kind of testament to, wow, you got some stuff you got to unpack and figure out. And by the way, one really personal data point that I'll put on this, my mother passed away in 2021, right in the middle of COVID. She was 90. She lived a very full life, but she died afraid and bitter and isolated. And I had an epiphany that if I don't do something, I will die like that. And so that was my primary motivation to do this work. I had to do whatever possible to, I don't know, find out where this angst was coming from and process it so that I could flourish hopefully into my 90s or beyond. And so I'm pleased that all these different outreaches, MEA, presence-based coaching, took me to spaces that were extraordinarily uncomfortable. There were times in that training where in this remote place in Asheville, North Carolina, I wanted to run from the room. I was so uncomfortable in terms of practicing these techniques and all this self-exploration. But still, I pursued it. I got through all of the training. I did some pro bono coaching, which I enjoyed. But what it mostly helped me do is clarify. I missed teams. I missed a collective. I missed a group of people sharing a struggle. And as that was occurring to me, and as I, being a CIO for all those years, I haven't let go of all of the explorations and what's going on inside AI. I use it myself pretty extensively. And I thought the intersection of artificial intelligence and what it's going to do to humanity is so important. We're already experiencing that through a lot of the delusion that's coming out of social media,
Yeah.
through these algorithms and all of the siloed tribalism that takes root from all that. Imagine what AI is going to do. And so that became my new intersection to explore. And then I met a guy. His name is Angus Fletcher. He happens to be a professor at Ohio State University. I live in Columbus, Ohio, so he's in my backyard. I heard him speak, and he again just blew the doors off my mind, because not that he's in the spaces that I just talked about, but he has studied the very nature of the mind. He's a neuroscientist by training, has his PhD from Yale in literature. So he is a true unicorn, really special mind, gifted not only in the art of storytelling, but in how storytelling works in the brain. His research theory that he calls story thinking is the very nature of the way our brains process information is in fact in story, which, think about it, explains why people love story so much. It's the way our minds work. I won't even attempt to try and explain it. He explains it in his work, in his book, Story Thinking. And now he just released a book called Primal Intelligence, which I think is a construct by which, I try not to be hyperbolic, but the world can understand this intersection of artificial and human intelligence. I'll take a breath there, but that is what I've spent the last 3 years immersed in, those different dimensions, most recent of which is Angus's work in primal intelligence.
Okay, so many great things, and we're going to include links to the things that Bob is highlighting right now with the MEA and Dan Pink's book, Power of Regret, and Angus Fletcher's books, Story Thinking and Primal Intelligence. So I'm really appreciating that you're calling out more resources. A big part of what we're trying to do in this podcast is leaving people with not only the inspiration of story and people's experience, but like, what do I do? I want to get access to those tactics. So, a few things to sort of put a, exclamation point on: the construct of imposter syndrome. I
Wonderful.
will say confidently, and I'm thrilled that you are calling it for what it is, and I'm thrilled that you specifically are calling it as an accomplished male executive, because so often I think imposter syndrome gets relegated to this conversation that it's a girl thing. It's, women having struggle. And what I'm hearing is how genderless the human experience is when it comes to achieving levels of, growth, leadership, et cetera, and that we get to that edge where we really don't have the confidence that, who people think we are, that those things, there's an incongruence. So I just think the permission for anyone listening right now to see that your experience really underscores the the shared experience that all human beings can face. I think secondly, what an awesome way to be vulnerable and to be willing to do the work inside before you jump to doing the work outside. And I think one of my leadership coaches over the years said, it's impossible to give away the things we don't possess authentically. And I think a lot of where a lot of executive coaches or life coaches or business development coaches like myself, like the things that we struggle with is if we don't have that lived experience and have that honest and vulnerable reflection, the ability for us to give or bring something to an awakening for others is so thwarted. It really starts with the authenticity and integrity within ourselves. So I think I appreciate that piece of the journey and want folks to get the benefit of that takeaway. I think the third thing I'm hearing, and it's one of the things I think about a lot is now how to acknowledge and recognize that in the age of AI and in the space of disruption and in the space of how our worlds are intersecting with things that are almost attacking the simplicity, the joy, the knowing, the confidence of the human experience, like it's all being very tested. And so
Mhm.
as you are stepping into this next phase and thinking about the role of mentorship and thinking about the role of investing in people finding their most true and authentic selves, what can you tell us about this idea of the liminal mind? I mean, where's the naming convention come from? It tell us about this and really the manifesto of what you're up to, and then let's talk about some of the ingredients that kind of come into this discovery process of our true selves in the name of flourishing. But first, what is this thing, the liminal mind?
Sure. A couple pre-frame thoughts, and because they're emerging as you were talking. In encouragement to people who are listening, when I look back, I recognize three phases in my now 65 years of life. The first phase was I felt this energy like I was running to something. Every next open door or doors that I knocked open from a career standpoint, family, all of it. There became a point in my 40s and 50s where I started to feel this kind of angst. And I thought to myself, this is a subconscious thought, admittedly, I wonder if I'm running from something. I'm not really running to something. So that's a shift. And then in my 60s, I realized I was running from myself the whole time. And so you have to start asking these questions about the stories in your head. That is the doors, that's the door opening to exploring, to doing that internal work, shadow work, as Jung called it, which I think is another powerful construct. So that all emerged into this notion that the liminal mind was really the inspiration came from MEA because they focus on growth mindsets. We talk about liminality a lot. Of course, the metaphor of the caterpillar and the butterfly and the transition of that liminal state. And so that became my kind of working, fulcrum. And everything I've done within the Liminal Mind Collective has been utilizing AI, by the way, intentionally as a way to help me research, as a way to help me think, and as a way to question what I'm feeling as I'm doing it. And what I mean by that is a lot of times I create something utilizing AI and I feel like I cheated. I feel like, this is cool, but I didn't create this from whole cloth from the beauty of my mind, like so many people might be able to do. See, there's the comparison, the imposter syndrome. That those voices all still chirp. But what I'm beginning to, and what I think the group is beginning to experience is the beauty of that kind of the liminality of it all, right? Just recognizing all of those contrasts and contradictions. So here's the definition of liminal: occupying a position at or on both sides of a boundary. And so being able to explore that boundary from both sides, whatever the boundary is, in our minds, in the workplace, that is the very definition of a liminal mind. So is it okay if I read the manifesto?
Please do. Please, yes.
We gather not to debate answers, but to dwell in a fertile tension between questions. We are four minds crossing a threshold between the coded and the intuitive, between what machines know and humans feel, between signal and soul. This is the liminal mind, a space for slowing down thought and speeding up awareness, a space where we unlearn the binary and reimagine the possible. We are not here to conquer the frontier of artificial intelligence. We are here to explore what it means to be fully human in its midst, to listen deeply, to speak honestly, to honor complexity without fear. This is not a curriculum. This is a covenant that we will hold space for transformation of mind, of self, of the systems we touch. That's our manifesto.
Wow, that's so impactful. And I appreciate the I love the diagnoses around that, that this is the covenant, the construct of being committed in community to hold that space. But the idea of being fully human in the midst of our world in artificial
Mhm.
intelligence and in the midst of this sort of transformation, technology transformation. There's
Right.
so much power in that. What is the outcomes, as you're thinking about the application of this manifesto and the who is engaging or intended to be engaged with this? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, the first group is what I would call a highly curated group. It's three people, four including me. And I wanted that to be small so it could be as safe a container as possible. It happens to be two women and two men, which I think is important and actually touches back on your comments earlier. I knew two of them quite well. They previously worked for me, but had since left Baker Hostetler. And the other one is a referral from somebody I know and trust who said, Bob, you need to meet this guy. So we had one-on-ones to explore the nature of this. I told them there's something really important here. And I have this deep sense that something important is going to be created from it, but I don't know what it is. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. So they agreed to spend 90 minutes a month for 12 months to have this progressive conversation, which I have loosely structured on primal intelligence, on the four primal powers. But also there's times of sharing where we really are getting to a space where they're sharing their struggles, both personal and in the workplace. And it's just beautiful. It's the highlight of my month. I know that, and they're telling me that it's the highlight of theirs too. So far, it's been just a really extraordinary experience of watching them show up and just lean in and be vulnerable in terms of these conversations.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say that concept of building that sense of connection and community, there's so much data that
Mm,
reinforces that we're in absent being very intentional. Human beings are becoming increasingly more isolated and more disconnected. So, just even in the spirit of prioritizing human connection around a progressive conversation
mm,
is really impactful. And so I think that has application in and of itself without regard to the thesis perhaps that's bringing you together. So I love that concept. You also mentioned the primal powers. Give us a
yeah,
little bit of a sense about what they are, and then I want to unpack how this is showing up in this cohort of the liminal mind and
yeah,
what we can take away from that if we're wanting to maybe explore this even further or even connect with you to explore it further. So let's start with what they are, and then we'll dive
yeah.
into what they mean.
Yeah, and again, important context is to understand that two things, which is why I'm so enamored with his work. One is it's based on neuroscience, and so this is a very these are these are natural attributes of being human. And everything he explores is pinned on that foundation. And it's tested work with US Army Special Forces. So that's why I think it's so approachable. It's not just theoretical, it's not philosophical. It's 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 the way our minds work and it's tested in the field. And in this case, the field of battle, if you will. He tells the story himself about how that collaboration came about, but I think it's a really important kind of pre-framing. So the four primal powers are intuition. I'll name the powers and I'll come back. Intuition, imagination, emotion, and common sense. Intuition is the most kind of deeply intrinsically human, and that is the form of being able to spot anomalies in an otherwise patternistic world. So think about this. AI is the most powerful force on earth for pattern analysis. What I'm talking about, though, with regard to human intuition is different. It's anomaly detection, anomalies to the patterns. And then what that does in the mind is it sparks imagination. It sparks imagination to explore, in a survivalistic sense, explore ways to get out so as not to be eaten.
Yeah.
That's the
Right.
origin. But now that shows up in the form of human creativity, minds like Marie Curie, Einstein, Steve Jobs, these are examples of people who noticed an anomaly and doubled down on the anomaly based on a hunch, based on their imagination that something might be true here. That's where the unique power for human creation emerges.
Okay.
But here, I think, is the most important power to harness, and that is emotion. In fact, so much so that the cohort and I are going to spend the next 4 months exploring human emotion. Because human emotion is, if you will, it's not the window. Think of the mind as a window, and emotion are the elements that can blur or clarify that window to your world, right? I've talked a lot about anxiety. Anxiety, all of us feel, depending on how we interpret our worlds, but we all should feel it or we're numb and it's dangerous. But anxiety can be tuned to the point where you feel it and you strive for awareness of where is that coming from, and it helps you attune how you then go forward to make decisions toward common sense. And common sense is simply the act of picking a new plan, because your your emotions have told you, whether you're anxious, the anxious mind is telling you that you probably don't have the right plan or you don't have enough information to be able to handle the situation you're in. If that emerges to anger, heightens to anger, anger is telling you you have one path forward, and it's aggression. And so all you have to do is think about that for a few minutes, and you can think of 100 examples of
Yeah.
watching something escalate to anger because somebody thought that was aggression was their only way through that situation. And then there's there's so much wonderful work out there. Brene Brown's work
Yeah.
on Atlas of the Heart, exploring the depth of human emotion and naming them and understanding that really is the superpower, because it's not something to be avoided or to run from or even to figure out a way to turn off through meditation. It is something to be attuned to because it becomes your alert system to understand something more about your environment. And then the question is, what do you do with that clarified information?
I the what you're describing, and I'm sure many who are listening are doing the same thing, as I'm sort of looking at my own journey of as an entrepreneur and a business owner and kind of coming through using primal intelligence. And when you think about what you're describing, I can see it makes so much sense. And I love that you're going to take that deeper dive on the area of emotion. And as I
Mhm.
do, I'm back, it's behind me, Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart, that it gives us language for emotion so that we then are more primed to step into that fourth primal power of common sense. Then it's the activation that sort of follows. Do you sense that, there's an instinct to move from I had a thought, now I'm going to take an action, and we don't move through those four pieces of our primal powers? Where are the blind spots, or where do things get tripped up, do you think, for people
Or
who may not have the rigor or the discipline or even a community to really access and harness those primal powers?
yeah, the try not to be cynical, but right now the world is flooded with emotions they don't see or understand. And
Yeah.
so much of our decision making and our interactions with other people is so heavily filtered through emotion, and we don't understand that. And so I think it's absolutely essential on so many levels. But to your point, the power of those respecting those four primal powers and how they work together gives one a deeper sense of, I always hesitate to say control.
I was gonna
Uh,
say control. That was the word that was, like, screaming in my head. Yes, control. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
but you're more, control has a stigma to it, and for all good reasons. But But to have a construct like that, that's why I'm so in love with his work, to have a construct like that, that you can move back and forth. For example, this is a great example. We had a conversation just last month about we transition from intuition to imagination, then flow back to intuition, and now we're moving into emotion. And one of the things we talked about with regard to intuition is how do you know whether your intuition, sometimes you can confuse intuition with fear. My gut's telling me I shouldn't do this. Well, you have to attune those emotions to understand, is that born out of fear,
Right.
or is that an intuition telling you that there's something different you ought to pursue? Incidentally, in the vein of more books, I read this book a long time ago, Jay Shetty's How to Think Like a Monk. I always tell people he's not trying to convince you to be a monk, but his characterization of kind of deep introspective thought. This was on when I was on my sabbatical, by the way. He, in his book, he suggests 7 days of a meditative journaling answering the question, what do I fear most? That opened the door to my soul in a way that was wild, because the progressive nature of that journaling across 7 days, your mind takes you deeper and deeper and deeper. And until we all get comfortable facing our fears, in the most truthful way possible, that is going to always filter how we see the world, including how we see the business world and the people we work around.
So, as you think about these great thought leaders that have impacted you and influenced you, and as you take inventory of present day around what it means to find your true self and the sense of the world, what do you know now that would have made a big difference if you would have
Right.
been willing, or would even have been aware to be aware earlier on your
Yeah.
journey?
What I know is the power of my mind to lie to me, delude me into believing in lies. And if I had known that 10 years ago, I could have processed through a lot more of this kind of deep angst, and shown up in ways that were not only good for the people around me, they would have been good for me too. And I would have relished in the journey more. I was obsessed with outcomes. And what I didn't realize at the time is my obsession with outcomes was all about earning that approval. I missed a lot of joy in the journey. And that's where human flourishing shows up, is finding joy in a struggle is kind of the ultimate. And a collective struggle in particular is, I think, the ultimate bar.
Well, two sort of kind of closing thoughts for today's discussion, and I can't wait, incidentally, for the next one. So let's just say part one,
All right.
check. Let's talk about actions. When I often conclude my conversations with folks that are on a journey and say, like, all right, there were 3 things that I could
Mhm.
action in the next 30 days in taking a deeper dive in anything that you've shared thus far. Like, what would be those ingredients, or what would I be putting my attention to take some actions to maybe reimagine where I am presently so that I can have this greater outcome of flourishing?
Okay. Don't hate me for this, but the first one I'm going to give you is inspired by a book.
Okay. No, why would I hate that?
The author is Dr. Dacher Keltner, and he wrote a book called Awe, AWE, The New Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life. He's a researcher out of Berkeley. He studied the nature of human awe, the experience of awe. And so, one of the key ways to experience awe is to be in nature. So, my number one recommendation, and I don't care if you live in a cold place, is get outside, but in particular, walk outside with no headphones, no technology in your ears, listen to your footsteps, and ask yourself, as thoughts ruminate through your head, am I running to something or am I running from something? That is the prompt that constantly pulls me into that space of questioning my mind and where my stories are taking me. So that's one. And I think the other, we of course alluded to it all the way through this, is there's so much amazing research and content and authorship out there. We've touched on a number of them. And if for people who are super busy, and I get it, reading can be a challenge if you're working really hard. Podcasts, though, are a great way to do it. Brene Brown herself has a wonderful podcast, and many, many do. So it really curate the content that you do feed into your mind as you're trying to just go about your day and relax. In other words, not working. And that's really it. It's those three things. The first two are bundled together. This asking this question, am I running from something or am I running to something? I think is a prompt that will take you deeper every time you ask it.
I love it. Well, knowing that you are on this personal transformation journey, knowing that you've got this community and collective, and as you think about the future, forecasting forward, in the next 10 years, I am drawing from you so many reasons to feel hope and
Mm.
to think about, notwithstanding there's a lot of fear and uncertainty relative to the age of AI. And yet I'm hearing this like deep sense of like confidence and groundedness. So if we were sitting here 10 years from now, what would have to have been true in our journey to give us hope that we can be fully human without regard to the disruptions, irrespective, if you will, of the disruptions that we may be feeling in our technical or digital world?
Yeah, I think I really, in 10 years from now, I think we will look back and we will see this time as a tipping point, Malcolm Gladwell, a tipping point towards this intuitive awareness that we're not okay and we can be better. I think the youngest generations feel that deep inside. I know even my millennial children in their 30s now, they had their early moments of pulling themselves off social media because they could feel the angst that was growing inside them. So I do think that younger generations are going to, I hope, explore that kind of intuitive notion that there could be a better way. My greatest dream is that my generation will wake up and even be bridge builders between our generation and the generations younger than us to really bring that into a more fulsome reality, because we can't just say, I've always hated this phrase, but don't you think the younger generations, whether it's forms of racism or other forms of, but don't you think younger generations, that is such a weak cop out. And I want to see, as part of this dream, my generation of boomers have their own kind of form of awakening that we can be better and we can be individually more whole, flourish together. And in the end, it really does come down to love. Can you love people for the beautiful mess they show up as every day? Because I know I showed up as a mess, only I hid it well.
Yeah. And and what a gift that you're doing the work now to see that you've got a different outcome. What It's such a gift to hear you talk about that reflection to in love to create those different outcomes. This has been an awesome conversation. I want to encourage folks, if you want to get in touch with Bob, again, we'll have some information available to you, and working with you in the context of coaching and just getting plugged into the things that you've described today are really impactful. I also want to say that I have a great hope in the world, and that while I trend as an older X, that the intersection of our booming and Xing, as our native analog ways of engaging to be transformational in the space with these native digitals, as we are seeing our Gen Zs and our Gen Alphas and the things coming beyond. I am so grateful that you are doing the work you're doing in service to a much greater good and a much stronger outcome of human flourishing for all. Can't wait to have you back and for us to deepen the discussion. Thank you. for that takeaway. And for me, my personal note is, what am I running towards something, or am I running away from it? That one's going to require a lot of nature walking this weekend. So I thank you, Bob, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Deb.
Thanks for being here. If today's conversation sparked something in you, we hope you'll carry it forward with curiosity, compassion, and courage. Subscribe to the show, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs it. Until next time, keep exploring what it means to be fully human.